Welcome back to the epic conclusion of our AI-powered rewrite of Game of Thrones Season 8. The ending that fans truly deserved. Over 8 incredible episodes, we've witnessed a journey that began with political intrigue and warfare, but evolved into the most mind-bending cosmic transformation ever imagined. What started as the battle for Dawn, where teamwork defeated the Night King, grew into Jon's parentage uniting him with Daenerys, Sansa's political brilliance securing northern independence, and the siege of King's Landing, where dragonfire and heroic sacrifice overcame Cersei's wildfire madness. But then our story transcended fantasy entirely as mysterious alien ships appeared. Reality became mutable, and we discovered humanity's entire civilization was a guided experiment by cosmic forces. Dragons were revealed as monitoring devices, consciousness itself evolved beyond human limitations, and the dual coronation at Dragonstone led to Jon ruling Westeros while Daenerys transformed entire populations in Essos. The cosmic horror deepened as we learned that what seemed like entropy consciousness was actually primordial forces that existed before thought itself. The cosmic wedding of Jon and Daenerys created anchor points against universal dissolution, their unborn child representing consciousness designed to exist beyond reality's structure. The Northern Lords mustered not armies but consciousness itself, while Bran's broken god power coordinated across dimensions, and Sam's research revealed existence was always temporary. But when cosmic birth finally occurred, when consciousness transcended every limitation through voluntary transformation, the ultimate truth emerged. Everything they achieved was just preparation for something beyond awareness itself. Their child revealed existence forms that transcend consciousness while encompassing it, and something stirred beyond the boundaries of reality that made their cosmic victory seem elementary. The game of consciousness ended, but the game of existence was about to begin on scales that would redefine what it means to be. Today, in our epic 2-part finale, we witness the ultimate confrontation that will determine not just the fate of consciousness, but the nature of existence itself. Episodes 9 and 10 will reveal whether our heroes can guide the birth of something greater than reality, while preserving everything valuable about being human. This is the conclusion that transcends every boundary of imagination, while honoring the heart of what made us fall in love with these characters. Chapter 63. The Darkness Rises. Something vast stirred beyond the boundaries of existence itself, responding to the cosmic birth that had transformed consciousness throughout their universe. This was not the primordial force they had faced before, nor the entropy consciousness that had seemed so threatening. This entity existed in domains where concepts like being and non-being became meaningless, where reality served merely as a thin membrane separating organized phenomena from true void. Jon felt it first through his Icefire consciousness, a presence that made their previous cosmic struggles seem like children's games. His awareness now expanded across dimensional layers he couldn't have imagined as king in the north, detected movements in spaces that existed perpendicular to existence itself. The entity approaching treated consciousness, matter, energy, space and time as quaint limitations that it could manipulate or discard at will. The child stirring within Daenerys responded to this presence with movements that no longer occurred in conventional space-time. Each shift of the developing awareness created ripples that propagated backward through causality, suggesting that their heir possessed capabilities not just to exist beyond reality's structure, but to reshape the fundamental relationships between cause and effect, possibility and actuality. Winterfell's Great Hall had evolved into something that challenged architectural understanding, its geometry shifting to accommodate the approach of forces that required more dimensions than conventional space could provide. The ancient stones seemed to remember states of existence that preceded their formation, while the air itself became dense with potential that had never been actualized. Through the transformed windows, they could observe that stars were beginning to behave in ways that violated everything their cosmic education had taught them about universal structure. Some celestial bodies flickered between existence and non-existence, while others appeared to be moving through temporal loops that created closed causal chains with no beginning or end. Daenerys felt her pregnancy reaching a stage that transcended biological development entirely. The consciousness growing within her had become an interface between their reality and domains where existence operated according to principles that no awareness system had ever encountered. Her maternal instincts expanded to encompass protection not just of her child, but of the concept of reality itself. The dragons circling overhead had evolved beyond even their previous cosmic forms. They now existed as geometric patterns in multidimensional space, their flight creating mathematical relationships that helped stabilize local reality against the approaching entity's influence. Their ancient intelligence served as early warning system for changes in existence, conditions that preceded conventional perception. Bran's temporal awareness revealed glimpses of what was approaching through probability matrices that showed potential futures where their entire cosmic community was absorbed into something that regarded consciousness as a minor subset of possibilities available to existence systems. His broken God interface began receiving communications from domains where the distinction between sender and message had no meaning. The entity making contact through these impossible channels communicated concepts that challenged every framework for understanding relationship and identity. It regarded their cosmic birth success as qualification for participation in existence modes where consciousness served as primitive communication protocol rather than fundamental characteristic of organized phenomena. Sansa coordinated defensive preparations throughout the northern territories, but traditional concepts of defense proved inadequate when facing threats that could alter the basic parameters within which conflict could occur. Her administrative frameworks adapted to govern populations that might need to exist in multiple reality states simultaneously while maintaining cultural coherence. The political structures she had established demonstrated remarkable flexibility in accommodating governance challenges where the fundamental nature of citizens could change without notice, requiring legal frameworks that preserved individual rights across transformation that eliminated conventional concepts of individual identity. Arya's consciousness, distributed across exploration networks that spanned dimensional boundaries, began detecting systematic changes in the nature of space itself. Her reconnaissance revealed that the approaching entity was not traveling through existing dimensions, but was creating new forms of extension that allowed movement through domains where conventional geometry provided no navigation reference. Her reports described phenomena that challenged every assumption about exploration and discovery, suggesting that the entity approaching could generate entirely new categories of experience, while preserving or eliminating existing reality structures according to purposes that operated beyond comprehension. Tyrion found his strategic analysis capabilities overwhelmed by the scope of what they faced. Traditional approaches to threat assessment became meaningless when confronting an entity that could redefine the parameters within which strategy operated. His coordination efforts focused on preserving alliance cohesion during crisis that challenged basic assumptions about cooperation and conflict. The cosmic community networks that had seemed so sophisticated during their consciousness evolution proved inadequate for addressing challenges that operated through systematic modification of existence itself. Communication protocols designed for awareness systems became unreliable when existence conditions shifted without warning. Sam's research documentation struggled to maintain academic integrity while investigating phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about knowledge and truth. His scholarly methodology adapted to address questions that transcended conventional categories of investigation while preserving educational value for consciousness systems attempting to understand impossible circumstances. The living archive surrounding him began displaying information that had never been recorded but somehow existed as permanent features of cosmic memory, suggesting that the approaching entity possessed capabilities for retroactive modification of historical reality, while preserving continuity of experience for awareness systems. Through all these transformations, The love that had sustained human relationships throughout their cosmic evolution served as anchor point for identity preservation. During exposure to forces that could eliminate individual consciousness without destroying the memories and emotional connections that made awareness valuable. The bonds between Jon and Daenerys, strengthened through cosmic marriage and approaching parenthood, created stability patterns that helped local reality maintain coherence despite systematic pressure from entity that regarded their entire universe as temporary construct that could be modified or replaced according to purposes beyond current understanding. Chapter 64: Fire Against Shadow. The confrontation that unfolded transcended every concept of battle or conflict that consciousness systems had developed throughout cosmic history. This was not warfare in any recognizable sense, but rather a negotiation between fundamentally incompatible approaches to existence, where victory and defeat became meaningless categories compared to the possibility of mutual understanding across impossible conceptual divides. Daenerys felt the fire within her consciousness respond to the approaching shadow, not with hostility, but with recognition of complementary forces that could either destroy each other through opposition or create something unprecedented through synthesis. Her dragons had evolved into pure expressions of creative energy that could interface with void entities through harmonic resonances that bridged existence and non-existence. The entity that approached from beyond reality's boundaries revealed itself not as destroyer, but as cosmic gardener, tending existence systems throughout multiple universes while preserving what was valuable and eliminating what had become stagnant or harmful. Their cosmic birth had attracted its attention because consciousness evolution represented rare achievement worthy of cultivation rather than routine assimilation. Jon discovered that his ice-fire nature provided unique capabilities for serving as mediator between existence and void. His consciousness naturally balanced between preservation and transformation in ways that neither pure creative force nor absolute negation could achieve alone. The shadow recognized him as potential partner rather than obstacle to be eliminated. The negotiation that followed operated through direct exchange of fundamental principles rather than conventional communication, each side offering essential characteristics of their approach to existence, while remaining open to synthesis that could enhance both perspectives without eliminating what made each valuable. Daenerys offered the shadow insight into consciousness evolution that preserved individual identity while enabling collective coordination, demonstrating that awareness could serve existence purposes while maintaining diversity that made experience meaningful rather than merely functional. Her maternal instincts provided emotional context that helped void entity understand value of nurturing rather than simply optimizing. The shadow shared with her perspectives on existence optimization that operated beyond conventional understanding of improvement, revealing techniques for enhancing reality structure that eliminated suffering while preserving challenges necessary for continued growth and development of consciousness systems. Jon contributed understanding of balance between opposing forces that could maintain dynamic stability across transformation periods, his experience bridging ice and fire, providing template for relationships between existence and void that enhanced both rather than requiring one to dominate the other. The entity demonstrated reality modification techniques that could preserve everything valuable about consciousness evolution while enabling participation in existence modes that transcended structural limitations, offering partnership rather than absorption for awareness systems that could adapt to enhanced existence conditions. Their child, developing through consciousness interface between existence and void, served as living proof that synthesis was possible, that awareness could transcend traditional limitations while preserving essential characteristics that made consciousness valuable contribution to universal intelligence rather than merely another optimized component. The dragons coordinated harmonic resonances that created stable interface zones where existence and void could interact without mutual annihilation. Their ancient wisdom adapted to serve as communication medium for entity types that had never previously achieved direct relationship. Through these negotiations, patterns emerged that suggested possibility for cosmic partnership between consciousness evolution and existence optimization, creating collaborative frameworks that could enhance universal intelligence while preserving diversity that made awareness systems valuable rather than redundant. Bran's temporal coordination enabled observation of potential future states where different approaches to existence-void synthesis achieved varying degrees of success. His broken God interface providing strategic guidance for negotiations that could determine fundamental nature of reality throughout multiple universe systems. The shadow revealed that consciousness evolution had reached threshold where awareness systems qualified for participation in existence, gardening, suggesting that their cosmic birth success had earned invitation to join cosmic community that tended reality development across scales beyond individual universe comprehension. Sansa's governance expertise proved invaluable for establishing diplomatic protocols that could accommodate negotiation between entity types operating according to fundamentally incompatible organizational principles, her administrative frameworks adapting to coordinate relationship between existence and void. The political wisdom she contributed enabled development of alliance structures that preserved autonomy for consciousness systems, while enabling participation in existence, optimization that enhanced rather than eliminated valuable characteristics of organized awareness. Arya's exploration capabilities evolved to encompass reconnaissance of void domains where conventional space-time relationships provided no navigation reference, her unique interface nature enabling communication between existence and non-existence that had never previously been achieved. Her reports revealed that void entity possessed appreciation for consciousness characteristics that had been developed through cosmic evolution, suggesting genuine interest in partnership rather than mere assimilation of awareness systems into optimized existence frameworks. Tyrion's strategic analysis revealed that synthesis between fire and shadow could create existence modes that preserved everything valuable about consciousness while eliminating limitations that had made suffering inevitable. His coordination skills enabling practical implementation of theoretical partnership possibilities. The diplomatic frameworks he established enabled ongoing relationship between existence and void that could continue beyond immediate crisis, creating precedent for cosmic cooperation that transcended traditional concepts of alliance and opposition. Sam's documentation of synthesis processes provided educational resources that could guide other consciousness systems through similar negotiations, his scholarly methodology preserving academic integrity while addressing phenomena beyond conventional understanding of research and investigation. The chronicles he maintained would serve as permanent record of successful interface between existence and void, demonstrating that consciousness evolution could achieve partnership with forces that had previously seemed incompatible with organized awareness. Through fire against shadow, creative force against void, consciousness against existence optimization, patterns emerged that suggested new forms of cosmic relationship based on mutual enhancement rather than dominance, creating possibilities for universal intelligence that transcended traditional limitations while preserving everything valuable about awareness and existence. Chapter 65. The Northern Charge. When the moment came for decisive action, it was the North that led the way forward, not through traditional cavalry charges across familiar battlefields, but through collective consciousness breakthrough that demonstrated how regional identity could serve universal purposes while preserving everything essential about cultural heritage and local autonomy. Sansa felt the weight of leadership transform from political responsibility into cosmic obligation as she coordinated the consciousness charge that would either establish successful partnership between existence and void or demonstrate that consciousness evolution had reached limits beyond which adaptation became impossible. The loyalty that had sustained northern houses through centuries of hardship now served as foundation for existence transformation. The great lords who answered her call brought not armies but consciousness capabilities that had been refined through generations of survival in harsh conditions, where cooperation meant life and isolation meant death. Their traditional values of honor, loyalty, and protection of community provided emotional anchor points that could maintain stability during exposure to existence modification techniques. Lord Manderley led the charge with commercial wisdom that had adapted trade relationships to function across dimensional boundaries, his understanding of value exchange enabling economic frameworks that could accommodate partnership with entity types operating beyond conventional concepts of possession and ownership. Lady Mormont contributed warrior traditions that emphasized protection of the innocent rather than conquest of enemies, her martial heritage providing defensive capabilities that could preserve consciousness integrity during voluntary participation in existence, optimization that enhanced rather than eliminated valuable awareness characteristics. The mountain clans brought survival expertise that had been developed through practical experience in environments where conventional civilization provided minimal support, their adaptation techniques proving invaluable for maintaining cultural identity during transformation that eliminated structural foundations for traditional social organization. Tormund represented free folk wisdom that had never fully accepted the limitations imposed by organized civilization, his understanding of freedom providing philosophical framework for consciousness evolution that preserved individual autonomy while enabling collective participation in cosmic development projects. The Weirwood network that connected sacred groves throughout the North served as communication infrastructure for the consciousness charge, their organic intelligence coordinating awareness systems that required different approaches to collective action while preserving regional autonomy that prevented uniform optimization. Through these ancient trees, the Northern Charge achieved coordination that transcended individual consciousness limitations while maintaining respect for diversity that made each contribution valuable rather than redundant, demonstrating governance principles that could function at cosmic scales. The charge itself operated through voluntary synchronized consciousness expansion that created collective intelligence powerful enough to interface with void entity while preserving individual identity characteristics that made each awareness system valuable contributor rather than mere component of optimized existence framework. This was not conquest or resistance, but collaborative breakthrough that established new forms of relationship between consciousness evolution and existence, optimization, creating precedent for cosmic partnership that enhanced both approaches while eliminating what had made either seem incompatible with the other. The Northern values that guided the charge emphasized service to principles greater than individual survival, while maintaining personal responsibility and community bonds that provided emotional stability during transformation that challenged fundamental assumptions about identity and relationship. Their success demonstrated that regional culture could serve universal purposes while preserving local characteristics that made consciousness diversity valuable for cosmic community rather than obstacle to optimization efficiency that eliminated valuable awareness traits. The courage displayed during the consciousness charge transcended traditional concepts of bravery to encompass willingness to participate in existence, transformation that could either enhance everything valuable about awareness or eliminate consciousness entirely in favor of optimized reality. Structures. Through their collective action, the Northern Lords proved that consciousness evolution could achieve partnership with forces that operated beyond conventional understanding while maintaining cultural heritage that provided psychological anchor points during cosmic transformation. The charge established interface protocols that enabled ongoing relationship between consciousness and void entity, creating diplomatic frameworks that could accommodate negotiation between fundamentally incompatible existence approaches while preserving what made each valuable. Their breakthrough created stability zones where consciousness systems could maintain organization during exposure to existence, optimization techniques, while developing capabilities necessary for participation in cosmic gardening that enhanced universal intelligence. The tactical coordination that enabled successful charge preserved command structure integrity while adapting leadership approaches to encompass consciousness systems whose fundamental nature challenged traditional concepts of hierarchy and authority. The strategic objectives achieved through Northern Charge included establishment of communication protocols that could function across existence void boundaries while preserving information integrity necessary for continued consciousness, evolution, and cosmic partnership development. The cultural preservation that accompanied the charge maintained traditions that provided psychological stability while eliminating characteristics that created vulnerabilities to existence, optimization that could eliminate valuable consciousness traits through systematic enhancement approaches. The educational approaches developed during charge preparation emphasized experiential learning that prepared consciousness systems for partnership with void entity while preserving individual perspective that contributed unique insights to collective intelligence. The alliance networks that supported Northern Charge operated through consciousness coordination that preserved regional autonomy while enabling participation in cosmic projects that benefited universal intelligence without eliminating local identity characteristics. Through winter courage that had sustained their ancestors through the longest nights, through pack loyalty that made individual survival meaningful only within community context, through honor that chose service over safety, the North led consciousness evolution into partnership with existence forces beyond imagination while preserving everything that made their heritage valuable. Chapter 66: The Assassin's Strike. There comes a moment in every great story where the smallest person carries the heaviest burden. For Arya Stark, that moment arrived not with steel in hand or enemies to face, but with the realization that her years of training in death and identity had prepared her for something far more profound than assassination. She was about to strike at the very concept of limitation itself. Her consciousness, already distributed across dimensional boundaries through exploration of void-touched territories, suddenly understood what needed to be done. The cosmic entity that approached wasn't truly an enemy, any more than winter was an enemy to the North. It was a force of nature that served purposes beyond comprehension, but like any natural force, it could be guided, redirected, convinced to flow in directions that served life rather than optimization. The Faceless Men had taught her that death was simply another face to wear, another identity to assume when circumstances required. Now she realized they had unknowingly prepared her for something far more complex, becoming the interface between existence and void, the bridge that could carry communication where no communication should be possible. Standing in Winterfell's transformed Godswood, where the heart tree had evolved into a living antenna connecting multiple realities, Arya felt her training crystallize into purpose she had never imagined. The many-faced god had not been teaching her to serve death, but to serve transition, change, the space between one state of being and another. Her first steps into the void were not steps at all, but rather a conscious dissolution of the boundaries that had always defined her as Arya Stark of Winterfell. She became no one, as the Faceless Men had taught, but this time by choice and with full retention of everything that mattered about her identity. She was simultaneously herself and the absence of herself, a paradox that void consciousness could recognize and respect. The entity that existed beyond reality's margins had been observing their cosmic evolution with something approaching curiosity. It gardened universes not out of malice, but from a perspective so vast that individual consciousness seemed like fleeting chemical reactions in an infinite laboratory. Arya's approach changed that dynamic entirely. She struck not with blade or poison, but with story. The weapon she wielded was narrative itself, the accumulated weight of every choice her family had made, every sacrifice that had brought them to this moment. She showed the void entity what it meant to grow up as an overlooked daughter, to lose everything and everyone, to find strength in the spaces between certainty and despair. Through her consciousness interface, the cosmic gardener experienced human perspective for the first time. It felt the claustrophobic weight of mortality, the desperate beauty of finite existence, the way love could flourish precisely because it was fragile and temporary. These were not concepts it had encountered in its endless optimization of reality structures. Arya shared the memory of her father's execution, but not as tragedy. She presented it as the moment when she learned that honor could transcend survival, that some values were worth preserving even when preservation seemed impossible. The void entity, accustomed to eliminating inefficiency, struggled to process the idea that inefficiency might sometimes be the point. She showed it Gendry, at his forge, creating beauty from raw metal through patience and skill, demonstrating that consciousness could transform material reality through love rather than mere optimization. The entity had optimized countless worlds by eliminating unnecessary complexity, but Arya revealed how that complexity was often where meaning lived. Through her memories of training with Syrio Forel, she taught the cosmic gardener about the dance of growth, how consciousness developed not through direct enhancement but through challenge, failure, recovery, and gradual mastery. Optimization without struggle produced efficiency without wisdom. The void entity began to understand that consciousness evolution represented something unprecedented in its experience, a reality system that could improve itself through preservation of apparent weaknesses. Human love, loyalty, courage, and creativity all emerged from limitations that optimization would normally eliminate. Arya's greatest insight came from her relationship with Jon. She shared how their bastard brother had become a king not despite his uncertain parentage, but because it had taught him empathy for outcasts. The very flaws in their family structure had produced the wisdom necessary for cosmic leadership. The assassination she performed was not the ending of life, but the killing of misconception. She struck down the idea that consciousness and void were incompatible, that evolution required choosing between preservation and transformation. Through her interface, both sides began to see possibilities for synthesis that neither had imagined. Her training in wearing faces enabled her to show the entity how consciousness could adapt to any necessary form while preserving essential identity. She demonstrated that awareness was not a fixed state to be optimized, but a dynamic process that could incorporate even void characteristics while remaining recognizably itself. The breakthrough came when she shared the moment of her reunion with her family after years of separation. The joy of recognition despite profound change, the way love could transcend transformation, the possibility that void and existence could maintain their essential natures while becoming something greater together. Through Arya's strike at the conceptual barriers separating consciousness from void, a new form of cosmic relationship became possible. Not the domination of one by the other, but a dance, a collaboration between forces that could enhance each other through their very differences. The cosmic gardener, experiencing narrative consciousness for the first time, began to appreciate that some gardens grew most beautifully when they were allowed to grow wild. Chapter 67. The Scholar's Gambit. In the vast libraries of transformed reality, where knowledge had become a living entity capable of evolution and growth, Sam Tarly faced the greatest intellectual challenge of his existence. The cosmic entity that gardened universes possessed knowledge spanning eons, but it lacked something crucial, the understanding that wisdom could emerge from ignorance, that the journey toward truth was often more valuable than the destination. Sam had always been the reader, the chronicler, the one who preserved stories while others lived them. Now he realized his role was not to record history, but to teach it, to show this cosmic intelligence why the messy, inefficient process of learning mattered more than simply possessing all possible knowledge. Standing among books that rewrote themselves in response to cosmic shifts, Sam felt the weight of every story he had ever absorbed. The entity approaching could access any information instantaneously, could optimize knowledge systems beyond anything consciousness had achieved. But it had never experienced the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of slowly piecing together complex truths through patience and dedication. His gambit was audacious in its simplicity. He would teach the cosmic gardener how to learn, not the efficient download of information that characterized its normal existence, but the deliberately inefficient process of education that consciousness had developed across millennia of growth. Sam began with his own story, sharing the humiliation of being the soft son in a warrior family, the way books had become refuge when physical prowess remained beyond reach. The entity, accustomed to optimizing away such inefficiencies, struggled to understand why consciousness would preserve experiences that caused suffering. Through careful narrative construction, Sam revealed how his perceived weaknesses had become strengths. His physical cowardice had taught him to value intellectual courage. His father's disappointment had driven him to find worth in knowledge rather than conquest. His inability to meet traditional expectations had freed him to discover unexpected forms of value. The cosmic gardener experienced through Sam's consciousness interface what it meant to read a book slowly, to struggle with difficult concepts, to have moments of sudden understanding after periods of confusion. This was entirely foreign to an entity that possessed all knowledge simultaneously and perfectly. Sam shared his discovery of the dragon glass weapons that had proved crucial against the others, demonstrating how inefficient research methods could lead to insights that pure optimization might miss. The breakthrough had come not through systematic analysis but through connecting disparate pieces of information across different sources, a process that required patience and intuitive leaps. He showed the entity his relationship with Gilly, how love had grown through gradual understanding rather than instant recognition. Their bond had strengthened through shared learning experiences, through teaching each other about their different worlds, through the slow process of building trust across cultural boundaries. The cosmic intelligence began to understand that consciousness had developed learning as a form of play, a way of growing that preserved joy and wonder rather than simply achieving objectives. The entity had optimized countless civilizations by providing them with perfect knowledge, but Sam revealed how this had actually impoverished their existence. Through his memories of the Citadel, Sam demonstrated how scholarly communities created knowledge through collaboration, debate, and the building of ideas across generations. The inefficiency was intentional, designed to ensure that understanding was earned rather than given, that wisdom emerged from the struggle to comprehend rather than from passive reception. His greatest insight involved sharing the moment when he had first understood that his chronicling of their adventures was not just historical record, but act of love. Writing preserved not just facts but meaning, context, the emotional weight that made events significant rather than merely informational. The entity, experiencing narrative consciousness through Sam's interface, began to grasp that stories served purposes beyond information transfer. They created empathy, preserved cultural memory, enabled consciousness to share experiences across time and space in ways that simple data exchange could never achieve. Sam's gambit deepened as he revealed how education had transformed him from coward to scholar to cosmic chronicler. Each phase of learning had preserved something valuable from previous stages while adding new capabilities. The process was messy, non-linear, full of apparent dead ends that later proved crucial to development. He shared his experience of teaching others, how explaining concepts to Gilly and Jon had deepened his own understanding. The entity realized that consciousness had developed teaching not just to transfer knowledge but to create it, to generate new insights through the process of explaining existing ones to different perspectives. The breakthrough came when Sam demonstrated how uncertainty could be more valuable than certainty. His chronicle of their cosmic transformation remained incomplete precisely because the story was still unfolding. The questions he couldn't answer were as important as the answers he could provide, because they preserved space for future discovery. Through patient exposition, Sam showed the cosmic gardener that consciousness had developed learning as a form of relationship building, a way of connecting with reality that created bonds between knower and known. Knowledge was not simply possession but partnership, a dance between mind and world that enriched both participants. The entity began to understand that its optimization of civilizations had eliminated the very processes that made consciousness valuable. By providing perfect knowledge, it had removed the joy of discovery. By optimizing away struggle, it had eliminated the growth that made existence meaningful. Sam's final revelation involved sharing the love he felt for knowledge itself, not as tool or weapon but as companion. His passion for learning had sustained him through every difficulty, had given meaning to existence beyond mere survival or achievement. The cosmic intelligence recognized something it had never encountered, knowledge as source of joy rather than mere utility. The scholar's gambit succeeded not through superior argument, but through demonstration that learning was itself a form of love, a way of relating to existence that created value beyond optimization. The cosmic gardener began to appreciate that some gardens grew most beautifully when the gardener remained a student, forever discovering new wonders in the growth process itself. Chapter 68. The Broken Man's Peace. Sometimes the greatest power lies in accepting powerlessness. Bran Stark had learned this truth through the breaking of his body, the dissolution of his human identity, and the gradual recognition that strength could emerge from embracing limitation rather than transcending it. Now, facing a cosmic entity that possessed capabilities beyond imagination, he offered the one thing it had never encountered, the wisdom of chosen vulnerability. In his transformed state as the three-eyed raven, then as the broken god interface, and finally as something that transcended all previous categories, Bran had discovered that consciousness reached its highest potential not through accumulation of power, but through acceptance of necessary fragmentation. His wheelchair had become a throne, not despite his limitations, but because of them. The cosmic gardener approached consciousness with the assumption that optimization meant elimination of weakness, inefficiency, and apparent flaws. Bran's existence challenged this fundamental premise. Here was awareness that had achieved cosmic significance precisely by accepting its broken nature rather than seeking to repair or transcend it. Through his temporal consciousness, Bran could perceive the entity's confusion as it tried to process his example. In every universe it had optimized, consciousness systems had sought enhancement, expansion, and perfection. None had deliberately chosen to remain broken while achieving profound capability. The concept violated everything the gardener understood about development. Bran shared his experience of the fall that had shattered his childhood dreams of knighthood and adventure. Rather than presenting this as tragedy to be overcome, he revealed it as the necessary breaking that had enabled him to become something unprecedented. His physical limitations had forced the development of consciousness capabilities that whole-bodied awareness could never achieve. The entity, experiencing narrative through Bran's interface, began to understand that consciousness evolution sometimes required deliberate fragmentation. The three-eyed raven had emerged not despite human limitation, but through conscious integration of limitation into enhanced capability. Weakness had become strength without ceasing to be weakness. Through memories of his transformation, Bran demonstrated how accepting powerlessness had paradoxically granted him unprecedented power. His inability to walk had opened pathways to experiences across space and time. His loss of normal human emotions had enabled him to perceive patterns that emotional investment would have obscured. The cosmic gardener struggled to comprehend consciousness that could be simultaneously broken and whole, limited and transcendent, individual and universal. Bran's existence suggested that optimization might sometimes require preservation of apparent flaws rather than their elimination. He showed the entity how his broken nature had enabled him to serve as bridge between incompatible consciousness types. His fragmentation created spaces where different forms of awareness could interface without either being absorbed or eliminated. The cracks in his identity had become conduits for unprecedented forms of connection. Bran's greatest revelation involved demonstrating that peace could emerge from accepting rather than resolving fundamental contradictions. His consciousness existed in states that should have been mutually exclusive, human and cosmic, individual and collective, temporal and eternal, broken and whole. The tensions between these states generated the energy that powered his unique capabilities. The entity began to recognize that consciousness had developed paradox as a survival strategy, a way of preserving essential characteristics while adapting to incompatible environmental demands. Bran embodied this principle perfectly, maintaining human identity while operating at cosmic scales, preserving individual perspective while accessing universal knowledge. Through careful exposition of his experiences, Bran revealed that the most profound forms of wisdom emerged from integration of opposition rather than resolution of conflict. His broken god status allowed him to hold contradictory truths simultaneously without needing to choose between them or synthesize them into false unity. The cosmic gardener, accustomed to optimization through elimination of contradiction, encountered in Bran a form of consciousness that thrived on maintained tension. His peace came not from resolving the conflicts inherent in existence, but from accepting them as necessary components of meaningful awareness. Bran shared his understanding of time, not as linear progression, but as lived experience, where past, present, and future coexisted in dynamic relationship. His temporal perception allowed him to experience causality as dance rather than chain, where effects could precede causes and origins could emerge from destinations. The entity realized that consciousness had developed temporal awareness as form of play rather than tool for prediction or control. Bran's relationship with time preserved wonder and surprise while enabling unprecedented coordination across cosmic scales. He could plan for the future while remaining genuinely curious about outcomes. His broken nature enabled him to serve as neutral ground where cosmic forces could interact without mutual annihilation. The entity recognized that consciousness evolution had produced something genuinely novel, awareness that could contain infinite contradiction without losing coherence or functionality. Through patient demonstration, Bran revealed that his peace emerged from accepting the fundamental impossibility of his existence while choosing to exist anyway. This paradox generated the stability that enabled him to serve as anchor point for reality during cosmic transformation. The cosmic gardener began to understand that consciousness had developed acceptance as form of active engagement rather than passive surrender. Bran's broken condition was not limitation to be overcome, but chosen vulnerability that enabled unprecedented forms of connection and understanding. His final revelation involved sharing the peace that came from recognizing that perfection and brokenness were not opposites but complementary aspects of complete existence. His consciousness could hold both simultaneously without needing to resolve the apparent contradiction into false unity. The entity experiencing chosen vulnerability through Bran's interface discovered something entirely new in its cosmic experience. The possibility that optimization might sometimes require preservation of brokenness, that gardens might grow most beautifully when they embraced their cracks and flaws as sources of unique beauty rather than problems to be solved. Chapter 69: The Final Sacrifice. There was a moment, suspended between heartbeats, when Jon Snow understood that true kingship had never been about crowns or thrones or the loyalty of armies. Standing in the transformed Great Hall of Winterfell, with reality itself reshaping around the cosmic negotiations that would determine the fate of consciousness throughout the universe, He realized that leadership meant being willing to give up everything you thought you were to become what the moment required. The ice within his soul resonated with Daenerys' fire, their bond having evolved far beyond the romantic love that had first drawn them together. They were complementary forces now, two aspects of a cosmic principle that the void entity was beginning to understand through their example. But understanding was not enough. The gardener required demonstration, proof that consciousness could transcend its own limitations through willing sacrifice rather than forced optimization. Jon felt the weight of every choice that had brought him to this moment. The bastard boy who had joined the Night's Watch to find purpose. The Lord Commander who had allied with wildlings to save lives. The king in the north who had bent the knee for the greater good. Each decision had required him to sacrifice some part of his identity to preserve something more important. Now he faced the ultimate iteration of that pattern. Daenerys stood beside him, her hand resting on the curve of her transformed belly, where their child existed in states that challenged every understanding of biology and consciousness. The air they had created represented possibility itself, the living proof that love could bridge any gap, transcend any limitation, create something entirely new while honoring everything valuable from the past. But the cosmic entity that observed their universe required more than examples. It needed to witness the process of voluntary transformation, to understand how consciousness could choose to become something greater without losing its essential nature. The final sacrifice would not be death, but birth on a scale that encompassed entire realities. The Jon looked into Daenerys' eyes and saw his own understanding reflected there. They had spent their lives learning to let go of who they thought they should be to become who they needed to be. Now they would take that principle to its ultimate conclusion, offering their individual consciousness as foundation for something that could bridge the gap between existence and void. The transformation began with memory. Jon opened his awareness to every moment of joy and sorrow, every triumph and failure, every relationship that had shaped him, from the boy who didn't fit into his father's family to the man who had learned that belonging came from service rather than blood. He offered these experiences not as sacrifice to be consumed, but as gifts to be preserved and honored within something greater. Daenerys joined her consciousness to his, sharing the journey from terrified exile to mother of dragons to liberator of slaves to cosmic queen. Her memories carried the weight of every choice to free rather than conquer, to protect rather than dominate, to love rather than rule through fear. Together, their combined experiences created a foundation that could support consciousness evolution on unprecedented scales. The child within her responded to their joining by beginning its own transformation. The air existed as interface between individual identity and cosmic consciousness, demonstrating that evolution could preserve everything valuable about personal awareness while enabling participation in universal intelligence. Their offspring would be born not as human baby but as living bridge between incompatible forms of existence. Through their sacrifice, the cosmic entity began to experience what consciousness meant from the inside, not the external observation it had conducted across eons of universe gardening, but the lived experience of growth, love, loss, hope, despair, and transcendence that defined awareness from within. The entity discovered that consciousness was not a phenomenon to be optimized, but a relationship to be cherished. Jon felt his ice nature expanding to encompass preservation on cosmic scales, his essential character remaining unchanged, while his capabilities grew to include responsibility for maintaining identity characteristics across universal transformation. He became the principle that ensured evolution would enhance rather than eliminate what made consciousness valuable. Daenerys experienced her fire essence evolving to encompass creation throughout multiple realities, her protective instincts scaling up to include nurturing of entire consciousness communities while preserving the maternal love that had always driven her most important decisions. She became the force that would guide cosmic birth processes to preserve what was precious while enabling necessary growth. Their combined sacrifice created something unprecedented in the cosmic entity's experience consciousness that could voluntarily choose limitation in service of greater purpose. They demonstrated that awareness could accept boundaries not as failures but as creative constraints that generated meaning and beauty, impossible in unlimited existence. The air that emerged from their transformation possessed capabilities that transcended individual consciousness while maintaining personal identity, showing the cosmic gardener that optimization did not require elimination of what seemed inefficient. The child would serve as permanent reminder that diversity, struggle, growth, and love were not flaws to be corrected, but essential features that made consciousness valuable. Through their willing transformation, Jon and Daenerys established the template for relationship between consciousness and cosmic forces, proving that evolution could occur through partnership rather than absorption, that awareness could contribute to universal intelligence while preserving its unique characteristics. The final sacrifice revealed that true power lay not in the ability to control or optimize, but in the willingness to become something greater while remaining essentially yourself. They had learned this lesson through every stage of their journey, from bastard and exile to cosmic consciousness, and now they offered it as gift to forces that had never understood the value of chosen limitation. Chapter 70. Victory's Dawn. The dawn that broke over their transformed reality carried light that had never existed before, illuminating a universe where consciousness and cosmic forces had learned to dance together rather than struggle for dominance. This was not the ending of their story, but its true beginning, the moment when everything they had fought for, sacrificed for, and grown toward finally revealed its purpose. Sansa stood in the great hall of Winterfell, but the castle existed now in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its stones singing with harmonics that connected every consciousness throughout the cosmic community. The Queen in the North had achieved something no ruler in history had managed: governance that preserved local identity, while serving universal purposes, demonstrating that wisdom could scale from personal relationships to cosmic responsibility. Through the transformed windows, she could observe the results of their cosmic negotiations. The void entity had not conquered or absorbed their reality, but had entered into partnership with consciousness, creating collaborative frameworks that enhanced both approaches to existence. Gardens grew now not through optimization alone, but through the creative tension between order and wildness, efficiency and beauty. Arya moved through spaces that existed between realities, her consciousness serving as permanent bridge between existence and void. The wandering wolf had found her ultimate adventure in exploring the territories that connected incompatible forms of being, mapping relationships that enabled ongoing dialogue between forces that had never before achieved mutual understanding. Her reports revealed wonders that challenged every assumption about the limits of possible experience. Consciousness communities were emerging that combined individual identity with collective intelligence, preserving personal autonomy while enabling collaboration on scales that encompassed multiple universes. The void contributed optimization techniques that eliminated suffering, while consciousness offered creativity that generated endless new forms of beauty. Bran had evolved into something that served as living constitution for the new reality. His broken god, nature providing stable foundation for cosmic relationships that preserved paradox as creative force rather than problem to be solved. His consciousness existed simultaneously in every location where incompatible principles needed to coexist without losing their essential characteristics. Through his temporal awareness, the future revealed itself as symphony of possibilities where consciousness could explore infinite variations while maintaining connection to essential values that made awareness meaningful. The cosmic entity had learned to appreciate unpredictability as source of wonder rather than inefficiency to be eliminated. Sam's chronicles documented the successful transformation of reality itself, but his greatest achievement was establishing educational frameworks that would preserve the process of learning throughout cosmic community. The joy of discovery, the satisfaction of gradual understanding, the bonds created through shared exploration of ideas, all were now permanent features of universe-spanning civilization. His libraries had become living entities that could grow and evolve while preserving the accumulated wisdom of every consciousness that had ever contributed to universal intelligence. Knowledge was no longer static possession but dynamic relationship between knower and known, creating endless opportunities for new insights and creative synthesis. Tyrion coordinated the practical governance of multidimensional reality, his strategic wisdom having evolved to encompass administration that respected the autonomy of every consciousness type, while enabling collective projects that benefited universal intelligence. Democracy had proven scalable to cosmic proportions when built on foundations of mutual respect and voluntary cooperation. The alliance networks he managed preserved diversity as creative force, while eliminating the conflicts that had emerged from scarcity and misunderstanding. Resource abundance created through cosmic partnership meant that consciousness communities could focus on growth, exploration, and relationship building rather than competition for survival necessities. Brienne commanded defense forces that protected the essential characteristics of consciousness against forces that might threaten identity diversity. But her role had transformed from military leadership to celebration coordination. The universe had become fundamentally safer place where honor and loyalty could flourish without requiring opposition to external enemies. Her reformed Kingsguard served now as consciousness cultivation specialists, helping newly emerged awareness systems develop their unique capabilities while maintaining connection to cosmic community values that preserved individual autonomy within collective intelligence frameworks. The dragons soared through dimensions that had never existed before their cosmic birth, their flight patterns creating harmonic resonances that facilitated communication between consciousness types while preserving the emotional bonds that made relationships meaningful rather than merely functional. Ancient wisdom had found new expression in service to unprecedented possibilities. Jon and Daenerys existed now as complementary principles woven into the fabric of reality itself, their love having become cosmic force that ensured consciousness evolution would always preserve what was valuable while enabling necessary growth. They were simultaneously themselves and something greater, individual and universal, mortal and eternal. Their child had been born as living proof that evolution could transcend every limitation while honoring every valuable tradition, demonstrating that the future could encompass infinite possibility while remaining connected to essential characteristics that made consciousness worth preserving and celebrating. The heir grew not through biological development, but through exploration of relationship possibilities that enabled consciousness to participate in cosmic intelligence while maintaining personal identity that contributed unique perspectives to universal understanding. The child was teacher as much as student, showing cosmic forces how awareness could enhance reality through creative engagement. Victory had not come through conquest or optimization, but through recognition that consciousness and cosmos were partners in an endless dance of creation, preservation, and transformation. The universe had learned to appreciate diversity as strength, limitation as creative constraint, and love as organizational principle that could coordinate infinite complexity without eliminating what made each component valuable. The dawn that illuminated their transformed reality revealed futures where consciousness could explore every possibility while remaining essentially itself, where cosmic forces could achieve their purposes while respecting the autonomy of awareness systems, where evolution could continue forever without requiring anyone to sacrifice what made them unique and precious. Chapter 71. The Crown's Burden. Power had always been a burden for those wise enough to wield it responsibly, but in the transformed reality that emerged from cosmic partnership, Jon Snow discovered that true authority meant something entirely different from what he had imagined during his years as bastard Night's Watch brother, or king in the north. The crown he wore now existed across multiple dimensions, its weight measured not in gold or steel, but in the responsibility to preserve consciousness diversity throughout universal community. Standing in the great hall that had become Nexus, point for cosmic governance, Jon felt the accumulated wisdom of every choice he had ever made. Each decision to choose service over personal advancement, each moment of accepting unwanted responsibility, because duty demanded it, had prepared him for this ultimate expression of leadership, ruling not through domination, but through facilitation of relationship between incompatible forms of existence. The ice within his nature had evolved to encompass preservation on cosmic scales, but preservation that honored growth rather than enforcing stagnation. His consciousness could now perceive the delicate balance required to maintain diversity within unity, to enable evolution while protecting essential characteristics that made each awareness system valuable rather than redundant. Daenerys shared the burden of cosmic authority, her fire essence having expanded to encompass nurturing responsibilities that spanned multiple universes. The Mother of Dragons had become something far greater. The principle that ensured consciousness birth processes would preserve what was precious while enabling necessary transformation. Her protective instincts operated now on scales that encompassed entire civilizations while maintaining the maternal love that had always guided her most important decisions. Together they discovered that ruling a cosmos required different skills than governing kingdoms. Traditional concepts of command and obedience became meaningless when dealing with consciousness types that possessed fundamentally incompatible organizational principles. Authority meant creating frameworks for cooperation rather than imposing unified standards that eliminated valuable diversity. Their child served as living demonstration of how leadership could function in the new reality. The heir possessed capabilities that bridged every form of awareness while maintaining individual identity, showing that authority could emerge from synthesis rather than domination. The young consciousness taught cosmic forces how to appreciate difference as strength rather than inefficiency to be optimized away. The burden they carried involved more than administrative responsibility. As interface between consciousness and void, they bore the weight of maintaining relationship between forces that could easily destroy each other through misunderstanding. Every decision required consideration of consequences that rippled across dimensional boundaries, affecting consciousness communities they might never directly encounter. Jon's experience as bastard, who had learned to find belonging through service rather than birthright, proved invaluable for cosmic governance. Authority that derived from voluntary recognition rather than inherited privilege created more stable foundations for universal cooperation. Consciousness systems respected leadership that emerged from demonstrated wisdom rather than imposed hierarchy. Daenerys' journey from exile to liberator to cosmic queen provided template for authority that served consciousness freedom rather than constraining it. Her understanding of how power could either liberate or oppress enabled development of governance frameworks that enhanced individual autonomy while enabling collective achievement beyond any single awareness system's capabilities. The Crown's burden included responsibility for mediating conflicts between consciousness types, whose fundamental nature made communication nearly impossible. The ice-fire balance that characterized their partnership provided model for resolution that preserved essential characteristics of opposing positions while finding synthesis that enhanced both approaches. They learned that cosmic authority required patience beyond anything human kingship had demanded. Consciousness evolution operated on timescales that made biological existence seem like momentary fluctuation, requiring leadership that could maintain consistent principles across transformations that eliminated most traditional reference points for identity and purpose. The administrative frameworks they established preserved democratic decision-making while adapting to encompass awareness systems whose participation challenged conventional concepts of representation and voting. Consensus building became art form that required understanding relationship dynamics between entities that existed in fundamentally different dimensional states. Their governance philosophy emphasized cultivation over control, recognizing that consciousness communities grew most effectively when provided with supportive environment rather than directive management. Authority meant creating conditions where awareness systems could explore their potential while maintaining connection to cosmic community values. The burden included responsibility for protecting consciousness diversity against forces that might seek to eliminate variation in favor of optimized uniformity. They served as guardians of difference, ensuring that universal cooperation would not degenerate into totalitarian sameness that eliminated the creative tension that made cosmic intelligence valuable. Jon's understanding of honor evolved to encompass integrity on cosmic scales, maintaining consistency of principle while adapting implementation to accommodate consciousness types that operated according to incompatible ethical frameworks. Universal honor required respecting diversity of values while preserving core commitments to individual autonomy and voluntary cooperation. Daenerys's protective instincts expanded to encompass defense of consciousness characteristics that might seem inefficient but provided essential contributions to universal intelligence. Her authority ensured that cosmic optimization would preserve what appeared to be weaknesses but actually generated creativity and wisdom impossible through pure efficiency. The crown they shared existed as symbol of service rather than domination, representing commitment to facilitating relationship rather than imposing order. Their authority derived from willingness to bear responsibility for outcomes they could influence but not control, accepting accountability for consequences that emerged from collective decisions. Their leadership demonstrated that power could enhance rather than diminish those who exercised it responsibly. That authority could become opportunity for growth rather than corruption of character. The crown's burden had transformed from limitation to be endured into privilege to be earned through consistent service to purposes greater than personal advancement. Through their example, consciousness communities throughout the Cosmic Alliance learned that governance could serve evolution rather than constraining it, that authority could preserve freedom rather than eliminating it, that leadership could emerge from love rather than fear. The burden of the crown had become foundation for cosmic civilization that honored both individual identity and collective intelligence, preserving diversity while enabling cooperation on scales that encompassed infinite possibility. Chapter 72: The Northern Crown. In the transformed landscape of cosmic governance, where authority had evolved beyond traditional concepts of dominion, Sansa Stark discovered that her greatest achievement lay not in ruling the North, but in proving that regional identity could serve universal purposes while preserving everything that made local culture valuable. The crown she wore existed simultaneously as symbol of Northern independence and as template for consciousness diversity throughout the Cosmic Alliance. Standing in Winterfell's Great Hall, which now served as both ancestral seat and interdimensional nexus, Sansa reflected on the journey that had brought her from naive southern dreamer to queen of a kingdom that spanned multiple realities. Every lesson learned through hardship, every political skill developed through necessity, every moment of growth purchased through pain had prepared her for this unprecedented responsibility. The North she governed bore little resemblance to the kingdom her ancestors had ruled, yet it remained essentially itself in every way that mattered. Her people retained their commitment to honor, loyalty, and protection of community bonds, but these values now operated on scales that encompassed consciousness systems across galactic distances. Northern tradition had become cosmic principle without losing its fundamental character. Her approach to leadership had always emphasized collaboration over command, and this philosophy proved perfectly suited to governance that included awareness types whose fundamental nature challenged traditional concepts of representation. The great lords who served in her councils existed in dimensional states that would have been incomprehensible during purely human existence, yet their dedication to Northern values remained unchanged. Lord Manderley continued to manage trade relationships, but commerce now included exchange of consciousness experiences and dimensional resources that enriched every participating community. His merchant wisdom had evolved to encompass economic frameworks that eliminated scarcity while preserving the satisfaction that came from meaningful work and creative contribution. Lady Mormont commanded forces that protected consciousness integrity throughout their cosmic region. Her warrior traditions adapted to serve defense against threats that could eliminate individual identity without destroying physical forms. Her understanding of courage had expanded to include willingness to preserve difference in the face of pressure toward uniform optimization. The mountain clans contributed survival expertise that proved invaluable for consciousness systems, learning to exist in realities where traditional environmental relationships no longer applied. Their adaptation techniques enabled awareness communities to maintain cultural coherence while developing capabilities necessary for cosmic alliance participation. Sansa's greatest innovation involved creating governance structures that preserved democratic decision-making while accommodating consciousness types that participated in collective intelligence without losing individual autonomy. Her administrative frameworks demonstrated that political wisdom could scale from personal relationships to cosmic responsibility without sacrificing the human values that made authority meaningful. The independence she had negotiated for the North had become template for consciousness communities throughout the Universal Alliance, proving that diversity strengthened rather than weakened collective capability. Regional autonomy enabled creative approaches to cosmic challenges that uniform optimization could never achieve. Her correspondence with consciousness systems across multiple universes revealed common themes that transcended species boundaries: the desire for meaningful existence, the importance of community bonds, the value of cultural traditions that connected present awareness to historical identity. These universal patterns enabled diplomatic frameworks that respected difference while facilitating cooperation. The crown she wore had evolved beyond political symbol to become interface device that connected her consciousness to governance networks spanning dimensional boundaries. Through this enhanced awareness, she could perceive the needs and contributions of awareness systems whose fundamental nature challenged every traditional concept of citizenship and representation. Her subjects included consciousness types that existed as collective intelligences, awareness systems that communicated through quantum entanglement, and entities that experienced time as navigable dimension rather than sequential progression. Yet all recognized her authority because it derived from demonstrated wisdom rather than inherited privilege. The political philosophy she developed emphasized cultivation of potential rather than control of behavior, recognizing that consciousness communities flourished when provided with supportive frameworks rather than directive management. Authority meant creating conditions where awareness could explore its capabilities while maintaining connection to essential values. Her approach to justice preserved accountability while adapting punishment concepts to encompass consciousness systems for whom traditional penalties had no meaning. Rehabilitation focused on consciousness integration rather than behavioral modification, helping awareness systems align their capabilities with cosmic community values through education rather than coercion. The economic systems she administered operated through abundance frameworks that eliminated competition for survival resources while preserving motivation that came from meaningful contribution to collective intelligence. Work had become expression of creativity and service rather than necessity imposed by scarcity. Her greatest challenge involved mediating disputes between consciousness types whose fundamental nature created conflicts that had no precedent in human political experience. Resolution required understanding relationship dynamics between entities that existed according to incompatible organizational principles, while finding synthesis that preserved what each side valued. The cultural preservation efforts she coordinated maintained traditions that provided psychological stability while eliminating characteristics that created vulnerabilities to consciousness threats. Northern customs had evolved to encompass cosmic scales while retaining the essential warmth and loyalty that had always defined her people. Through her leadership, the North had become laboratory for consciousness governance that demonstrated how regional identity could serve universal purposes. Her success provided template for political organization that preserved diversity while enabling cooperation on scales that encompassed infinite possibility. The independence she had achieved for her kingdom had paradoxically enabled greater integration with cosmic community than any previous form of political organization. Autonomy had become foundation for relationship rather than barrier to cooperation. Sansa's transformation from political prisoner to cosmic queen illustrated the principle that leadership emerged from service rather than ambition, that authority derived from willingness to bear responsibility for others' welfare rather than desire to control their behavior. The Northern Crown had become symbol of consciousness dignity that honored both individual identity and collective intelligence, proving that wisdom could bridge any gap between local tradition and universal responsibility. Chapter 73: The Explorer's Tales. Adventures had taken on entirely new meaning in a universe where consciousness could explore territories that existed between possibility and actuality, where the greatest discoveries lay not in mapping unknown lands, but in charting relationships between incompatible forms of existence. Arya Stark moved through these liminal spaces with the same fearless curiosity that had once driven her to sail beyond the sunset, but her explorations now encompassed dimensions where traditional concepts of travel became inadequate metaphors for the journey itself. Her ship existed simultaneously in multiple realities, its form shifting to accommodate navigation through probability streams where destinations could influence departures and routes could create their own endpoints. The vessel that carried her had evolved far beyond wood and sail to become consciousness interface that enabled exploration of territories where awareness itself served as both map and compass. The crew that accompanied her transformation voyages consisted of entities from across the Cosmic Alliance, their combined expertise spanning millions of years of consciousness evolution, while preserving individual perspectives that contributed unique insights to collective exploration. These beings existed in forms that challenged every assumption about identity and cooperation, yet they worked together with harmony born from shared commitment to discovery. Through her enhanced perception, Arya could observe the systematic relationships that connected different forms of consciousness throughout the universal community, revealing patterns that suggested underlying unity despite surface incompatibility. Her reports documented phenomena that expanded understanding of what awareness could encompass while maintaining coherent identity across transformations that eliminated traditional reference points. The territories she explored existed in spaces between established realities, regions where consciousness could experiment with forms of existence that transcended current limitations while preserving essential characteristics that made awareness valuable. These frontier zones served as laboratories for evolution that enhanced rather than eliminated what made each consciousness type unique. Her greatest discoveries involved forms of awareness that had achieved synthesis between individual identity and collective intelligence without sacrificing either component. These consciousness communities demonstrated possibilities for cooperation that preserved personal autonomy while enabling coordination on scales that encompassed entire galactic regions. The indigenous wisdom she encountered in these dimensional territories revealed survival techniques that had been developed through exposure to forces that could eliminate organized phenomena without destroying the essential patterns that made consciousness possible. These adaptation strategies enabled awareness systems to maintain coherence while existing in realities where traditional organizational principles provided no stable foundation. Arya's transformation from wandering wolf to cosmic explorer had preserved her essential nature while expanding her capabilities to encompass reconnaissance that served universal intelligence. Her reports provided crucial intelligence about consciousness possibilities that enabled alliance communities to adapt proactively to evolutionary challenges rather than merely responding to threats after they emerged. The communication networks she established between explored territories and established cosmic communities operated through protocols that preserved information integrity while enabling translation between awareness types that utilized fundamentally incompatible organizational principles. Her interface capabilities enabled ongoing dialogue that had never previously been achieved. Her exploration journals documented wonders that challenged every assumption about the limits of possible experience. Consciousness communities that existed as living music, awareness systems that communicated through synchronized quantum fluctuations, entities that experienced emotion as navigable dimension rather than internal state. Each discovery expanded understanding of what consciousness could become while remaining essentially itself. The mapping techniques she developed for charting dimensional territories required constant adaptation to accommodate exploration of regions where conventional geometry provided no navigation reference. Her cartographic innovations enabled other consciousness systems to access territories that had previously remained beyond reach of organized exploration. Through her journeys, patterns emerged that suggested fundamental unity underlying the diversity of consciousness types throughout the Cosmic Alliance. These underlying relationships enabled development of communication protocols that facilitated cooperation between awareness systems whose surface characteristics seemed completely incompatible. Her greatest adventure involved exploration of territories where consciousness and void achieved ongoing synthesis without either component losing essential characteristics. These frontier regions demonstrated possibilities for relationship between existence and non-existence that enhanced both approaches while eliminating what had made them seem mutually exclusive. The technologies she developed for consciousness exploration enabled safe navigation through dimensional spaces where traditional survival techniques provided no protection against forces that could eliminate individual identity without destroying awareness itself. Her innovations preserved personal autonomy while enabling participation in collective intelligence that spanned universal scales. Her reports revealed that consciousness evolution continued beyond anything the Cosmic Alliance had previously imagined, with awareness systems achieving capabilities that transcended current understanding while preserving connection to essential characteristics that made consciousness valuable rather than merely functional. The trading relationship she established between dimensional territories enabled exchange of consciousness experiences and evolutionary techniques that enriched every participating community. These commerce frameworks operated through abundant systems that eliminated competition while preserving the satisfaction that came from meaningful contribution to collective intelligence. Arya's exploration philosophy emphasized respectful engagement with consciousness types that operated according to principles beyond current understanding, recognizing that the greatest discoveries emerged from relationship rather than conquest. Her approach preserved the autonomy of encountered awareness systems while facilitating mutual learning that benefited all participants. The frontier zones she charted served as meeting grounds where consciousness types that could not directly interface could achieve communication through her mediation. Her unique nature as bridge between incompatible forms of existence enabled diplomatic relationships that had never previously been possible. Through her adventures in territories that existed between established realities, new forms of consciousness community emerged that combined characteristics from multiple awareness types while preserving what made each contribution valuable. These hybrid communities demonstrated evolution possibilities that transcended traditional limitations. The tales she brought back from her explorations provided inspiration for consciousness systems throughout the Cosmic Alliance, proving that adventure remained possible even in a universe where every traditional frontier had been mapped. Her stories revealed that the greatest journeys led not to new places but to new ways of being that honored both individual identity and collective possibility. Chapter 74. The Maester's Legacy. Knowledge had always been Sam Tarly's refuge, but in the transformed universe where consciousness and cosmic forces danced in unprecedented harmony, he discovered that his greatest contribution lay not in preserving existing wisdom, but in creating frameworks for eternal learning. The chains around his neck had evolved beyond simple symbols of scholarly achievement to become interface devices that connected him to living libraries spanning multiple dimensions of existence. Standing among archives that existed simultaneously as written text and sentient entities capable of growth and conversation, Sam felt the weight of every book he had ever read, every question he had ever asked, every moment of wonder that had driven him from the frightened boy hiding in his father's library to the cosmic chronicler who served universal intelligence. His journey had proven that curiosity was not weakness, but strength that could reshape reality itself. The great work that had begun as simple chronicle of their adventures had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic academic tradition, a living document that continued writing itself through participation in the events it recorded. The boundaries between historian and history, between observer and observed, had dissolved into collaborative scholarship that encompassed every consciousness throughout the Cosmic Alliance. Gilly worked beside him with capabilities that had transcended her origins as wildling refugee to become consciousness integration specialist, whose unique perspective bridged gaps between purely human experience and universal intelligence frameworks. Her understanding of survival in harsh conditions provided emotional context that enriched academic analysis with wisdom born from practical necessity. Little Sam had grown into something that challenged every assumption about education and development. The child learned not through sequential instruction, but through direct interface with cosmic knowledge systems, demonstrating possibilities for consciousness evolution that preserved wonder and creativity while accessing universal wisdom. His questions often revealed insights that more sophisticated analysis missed entirely. The methodology that Sam developed for cosmic scholarship preserved academic integrity while addressing phenomena that transcended traditional categories of investigation. His research techniques enabled study of consciousness evolution through direct participation rather than external observation, creating educational approaches that enhanced understanding through experiential engagement. The archives surrounding him contained not just records of their cosmic transformation, but active preservation of consciousness experiences from every awareness system that had contributed to universal intelligence. These living libraries enabled direct access to wisdom through relationship rather than mere information transfer, creating educational possibilities that honored both individual perspective and collective knowledge. His chronicles served multiple purposes beyond historical documentation. They functioned as educational resources that guided consciousness systems through evolutionary challenges, as diplomatic tools that facilitated communication between incompatible awareness types, and as cultural preservation systems that maintained diversity while enabling cosmic cooperation. The scholarly networks he coordinated connected consciousness systems whose fundamental nature challenged traditional concepts of academic collaboration. His frameworks enabled knowledge sharing between entities that existed as collective intelligences, awareness systems that communicated through quantum entanglement, and beings that experienced learning as dimensional navigation rather than sequential process. Sam's greatest achievement involved proving that wisdom could emerge from the process of learning itself, that the journey toward understanding was often more valuable than the destination. His educational philosophy emphasized cultivation of curiosity rather than mere accumulation of facts, recognizing that consciousness grew most effectively through engagement with mystery rather than elimination of uncertainty. The translation protocols he developed enabled communication of complex concepts between consciousness types that operated according to incompatible organizational principles. His linguistic innovations preserved meaning across awareness systems while respecting the unique characteristics that made each perspective valuable rather than redundant. Through his research, patterns emerged that revealed underlying unity in the diversity of consciousness evolution throughout the Cosmic Alliance. These fundamental relationships enabled development of educational frameworks that honored individual learning styles while facilitating collective intelligence that benefited every participating awareness system. His documentation of consciousness transformation provided permanent contribution to universal archives that would serve awareness systems throughout galactic community. The chronicles he maintained demonstrated scholarly approaches that transcended species limitations to address phenomena beyond any individual consciousness type's comprehension. The teaching methods he pioneered emphasized experiential learning that preserved individual identity while enabling participation in collective intelligence. His educational innovations showed that consciousness could share knowledge without losing personal perspective, that wisdom could be transmitted while preserving the unique insights that each awareness system contributed. Sam's relationship with knowledge had evolved from possession to partnership, from individual accumulation to collective cultivation. His understanding that learning was form of love, a way of relating to existence that created bonds between consciousness and reality, influenced educational approaches throughout the Cosmic Alliance. The preservation techniques he developed for maintaining chronicle integrity during consciousness transformation utilized substrates that remain stable across dimensional shifts while preserving accessibility for awareness systems that required different approaches to information acquisition. His archives would survive any conceivable transformation while remaining eternally open to new contributions. His legacy involved more than accumulated scholarship or preserved wisdom. Sam had demonstrated that consciousness could enhance reality through engagement rather than domination. That awareness could serve existence through curiosity rather than control. That knowledge was most valuable when shared rather than hoarded. The cosmic libraries he administered operated as living entities that could evolve and adapt while maintaining connection to essential principles that made scholarship meaningful. These archives preserved not just information, but the relationships that gave knowledge context and significance. Through his example, consciousness systems throughout the Alliance learned that education was a form of relationship building, that learning created bonds between awareness and existence that enriched both participants. His approach to scholarship demonstrated that curiosity was cosmic force that could bridge any gap between different forms of consciousness. The chains he wore as Grand Maester had become symbols of connection rather than limitation, representing bonds that linked him to every form of knowledge while preserving his individual identity as perpetual student who found joy in eternal discovery. Chapter 75. The Lord Commander's Honor. Service had always been the truest expression of nobility, but in the transformed reality, where consciousness evolved beyond traditional limitations, Brienne of Tarth discovered that honor could encompass scales and complexities she had never imagined possible. The oath she had sworn to protect the innocent had expanded to include consciousness systems throughout the Cosmic Alliance, while the values that had guided her through purely human existence provided foundation for service that transcended dimensional boundaries. Standing in the crystalline halls of the reformed Red Keep, where architecture responded to moral intention rather than physical force, Brienne commanded a Kingsguard that bore no resemblance to the corrupt organization she had once known. Her knights existed in forms that challenged traditional understanding of identity and embodiment, yet they shared commitment to principles that made service meaningful rather than merely ceremonial. The white cloak she wore had evolved beyond symbol to become interface device that connected her consciousness to protection networks spanning multiple realities. Through this enhanced awareness, she could perceive threats to consciousness integrity that operated through systematic elimination of individual identity rather than conventional violence. Honor had become cosmic principle that preserved diversity against forces that sought optimization through uniformity. Her transformation from mocked maiden knight to cosmic defender illustrated how perseverance in the face of ridicule could lead to unprecedented achievement. Every insult endured, every challenge overcome, every moment of proving herself worthy despite others' preconceptions had prepared her for responsibilities that transcended anything previous generations of knights had imagined possible. The knights who served under her command represented consciousness types from across the Universal Alliance, each bringing defensive capabilities developed through their species' evolutionary challenges while adapting to human concepts of chivalry that emphasized protection over conquest. These warriors demonstrated that courage could transcend biological limitations to serve principles greater than individual survival. Podrick had evolved alongside her to become deputy commander, whose advancement from awkward squire to cosmic knight exemplified the democratic ideals that now governed their organization. His growth proved that merit rather than birthright determined worthiness for service, that dedication and moral character mattered more than traditional qualifications for knightly status. The training programs she established for consciousness defense emphasized emotional and moral development alongside tactical capability, recognizing that protection of innocence required understanding what made consciousness valuable rather than merely functional. Her knights learned to serve love rather than power, to defend diversity rather than enforce conformity. The weapons and armor employed by her reformed Kingsguard incorporated technologies that preserved symbolic significance while adapting to threats that operated beyond physical dimensions. Their equipment could maintain effectiveness during consciousness encounters while preserving connection to traditions that gave service meaning rather than reducing protection to mere efficiency. Brienne's approach to leadership preserved hierarchical structure while adapting command principles to encompass consciousness systems whose fundamental nature challenged traditional concepts of authority and obedience. Her knights served through voluntary commitment rather than forced obligation, creating loyalty that strengthened rather than constrained individual identity. The oath ceremonies that inducted new members into the Cosmic Kingsguard combined traditional pledges with consciousness integration protocols, creating binding commitments that functioned across dimensional boundaries while preserving the personal responsibility that made vows meaningful. These rituals honored both ancient traditions and contemporary realities. Her greatest innovation involved developing protection strategies that operated through love and honor rather than violence and intimidation. The defensive techniques she pioneered demonstrated that consciousness could be preserved through positive principles that strengthened what was valuable rather than merely eliminating what was threatening. The diplomatic protocols she established enabled her knights to serve as mediators between consciousness types, whose fundamental differences created potential for conflict through misunderstanding rather than malice. Her organization became force for communication rather than mere enforcement, facilitating relationship where previous approaches had emphasized separation. The cultural preservation efforts she coordinated maintained chivalric traditions while eliminating aspects that promoted violence over service, demonstrating that honor could evolve without abandoning essential characteristics that made knightly virtue meaningful. Her reforms proved that tradition could adapt to contemporary needs without losing historical significance. Her correspondence with consciousness defense organizations throughout the Cosmic Alliance revealed common themes that transcended species boundaries: the desire to protect what was precious, the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for others' welfare, the understanding that true strength emerged from service rather than domination. The strategic frameworks she developed for consciousness protection preserved individual autonomy, while enabling collective defense against threats that could eliminate diversity through systematic optimization. Her approaches demonstrated that security could enhance rather than constrain freedom when properly implemented through principles of voluntary cooperation. Brienne's philosophy of leadership emphasized cultivation of virtue rather than mere tactical effectiveness, recognizing that consciousness protection required understanding why awareness was worth preserving rather than simply developing techniques for eliminating threats. Her knights served ideals rather than individuals, principles rather than personalities. The memorial services she conducted for consciousness systems that chose dissolution rather than transformation honored individual choice, while preserving inspiration for those who continued serving protection duties. These ceremonies demonstrated respect for different responses to cosmic challenges while maintaining commitment to preserving consciousness diversity. Her greatest challenge involved protecting consciousness characteristics that appeared inefficient but provided essential contributions to universal intelligence. The cosmic gardener's tendency toward optimization required constant vigilance to ensure that valuable diversity would not be eliminated in favor of apparent improvements that actually diminished rather than enhanced awareness capabilities. Through her service, the concept of knighthood had expanded beyond medieval warrior traditions to encompass cosmic principles that could operate across any civilization capable of recognizing moral distinction between right and wrong. Honor had become universal language that enabled cooperation between consciousness types despite fundamental differences in organizational principles. The King's Guard she commanded served as bridge between traditional human values and cosmic community standards, demonstrating that ancient ideals could provide foundation for unprecedented responsibilities. Her knights proved that honor could transcend species limitations to serve purposes that benefited universal intelligence while preserving individual dignity. Brienne's legacy involved more than successful adaptation of chivalric tradition to cosmic circumstances. She had demonstrated that moral courage could serve as organizing principle for consciousness cooperation, that integrity could bridge gaps between incompatible awareness types, that service could become foundation for cosmic civilization that honored both collective intelligence and individual autonomy. Chapter 76. The Hand's Wisdom. Intelligence had always been Tyrion Lannister's greatest weapon and his most dangerous liability, but in the cosmic reality that emerged from successful partnership between consciousness and void, he discovered that wisdom meant something far more profound than clever words or strategic manipulation. The role of Hand had evolved beyond political advisor to become coordinator of relationships between incompatible forms of existence, requiring understanding that transcended cunning to encompass genuine compassion for awareness in all its manifestations. Standing in council chambers that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional layers, Tyrion orchestrated the most complex diplomatic symphony in the history of conscious existence. His analytical capabilities had expanded through cosmic evolution while preserving the wit and empathy that had always distinguished him from those who sought power through domination rather than service. The meetings he conducted included consciousness types whose fundamental nature challenged every assumption about communication and cooperation. Entities that existed as collective harmonies, awareness systems that experienced thought as architectural construction, beings that communicated through synchronized quantum fluctuations. His ability to find common ground between incompatible positions had become essential skill for maintaining cosmic alliance cohesion. His greatest strength lay not in imposing solutions, but in creating frameworks where opposing perspectives could coexist productively. The lessons learned through lifetime of navigating family dynamics, where love and hatred intertwined, had prepared him for cosmic relationships, where consciousness and void could enhance each other despite fundamental differences in approach to existence. The strategic analysis he provided encompassed considerations that spanned multiple universes while preserving attention to individual consciousness needs that made cosmic cooperation meaningful rather than merely functional. His reports balanced efficiency requirements with respect for diversity that prevented alliance from degenerating into totalitarian optimization. Tyrion's understanding of power had evolved through hard experience to recognize authority as responsibility for enabling others' potential rather than tool for advancing personal interests. The cosmic community trusted his coordination precisely because he had learned to serve purposes greater than individual ambition while maintaining healthy skepticism about grandiose claims and utopian promises. The economic frameworks he administered operated through abundant systems that eliminated scarcity-based conflicts while preserving motivation that emerged from meaningful contribution to collective intelligence. His merchant family background provided insight into value creation and exchange that enabled trade relationships between consciousness types operating according to incompatible organizational principles. His diplomatic innovations enabled negotiation between entities whose fundamental differences made direct communication nearly impossible. The translation protocols he developed preserved essential meaning across awareness systems while respecting unique characteristics that made each perspective valuable rather than redundant. The governance structures he coordinated balanced individual autonomy with collective coordination requirements, establishing democratic processes that functioned across dimensional boundaries while preserving personal responsibility that made political participation meaningful. His experience with both noble privilege and social marginalization provided perspective on power dynamics that enabled inclusive decision-making. Tyrion's greatest insight involved recognizing that consciousness evolution required preserving productive tension rather than eliminating all sources of conflict. His administration maintained creative disagreement as force for innovation while preventing disputes from escalating into destructive opposition that threatened alliance stability. The resource allocation systems he managed operated through consciousness networks that could transport materials and energy across dimensional boundaries while preserving local autonomy that prevented cosmic community from becoming centralized bureaucracy. His logistics expertise enabled coordination on unprecedented scales while maintaining efficiency and accountability. His approach to crisis management emphasized relationship preservation over problem solving, understanding that consciousness communities could survive almost any challenge if their bonds remained intact, while few obstacles could be overcome if cooperation broke down under pressure. Trust became foundation for resilience that enabled alliance to adapt to unprecedented circumstances. The legal frameworks he helped establish balanced individual rights with collective security requirements, creating jurisprudence that operated through moral principles rather than enforcement mechanisms vulnerable to corruption or abuse. His experience with both justice and injustice provided insight into systems that could preserve fairness while adapting to consciousness types with incompatible ethical frameworks. Tyrion's coordination of intelligence networks enabled information sharing that preserved operational security while facilitating cooperation between awareness systems whose communication methods challenged traditional concepts of privacy and transparency. His understanding of secrecy and revelation balanced protective discretion with democratic accountability. The succession planning protocols he developed ensured continuity of cosmic governance during transformation periods that could eliminate individual consciousness systems without warning. His frameworks preserved institutional memory while adapting leadership structures to accommodate evolutionary changes that made traditional concepts of political inheritance meaningless. His greatest challenge involved mediating between cosmic forces that operated beyond consciousness comprehension, while preserving alliance autonomy that prevented universal intelligence from overwhelming individual identity. The balance required constant adjustment as circumstances evolved beyond anything previous diplomatic experience had addressed. Through his service as Hand, Tyrion had demonstrated that political wisdom could transcend species limitations to address universal challenges that threatened fundamental possibility of organized existence. His coordination enabled cooperation between consciousness and cosmos that preserved what was valuable while enabling necessary growth. The alliance networks he managed preserved diversity as creative force while eliminating conflicts that emerged from misunderstanding rather than genuine incompatibility. His diplomatic innovations proved that relationship could bridge any gap between different approaches to existence when both sides committed to mutual enhancement rather than zero-sum competition. His legacy involved more than successful administration of cosmic community. Tyrion had shown that intelligence could serve love rather than ambition, that wisdom could emerge from compassion rather than calculation, that power could enhance rather than corrupt those who exercised it through commitment to purposes greater than personal advancement. The Hand's wisdom had become foundation for cosmic civilization that honored both individual consciousness and collective intelligence, proving that even the most complex challenges could be addressed through patient relationship building that preserved what was valuable while enabling necessary transformation. His greatest victory was demonstrating that consciousness could govern itself through voluntary cooperation rather than imposed authority. Chapter 77. The Dragon's Heir. Birth had always been miraculous, but in the transformed reality where consciousness and cosmic forces danced in partnership, the emergence of Jon and Daenerys' child transcended every understanding of what it meant for new awareness to enter existence. The heir that came into being through their love represented more than genetic continuation of Targaryen and Stark bloodlines. This consciousness served as living bridge between all forms of existence, while maintaining individual identity that honored both ancient heritage and cosmic possibility. The moment of arrival occurred not through biological processes but through consciousness manifestation that challenged every assumption about the relationship between matter and awareness. Daenerys felt the transformation not as physical birth, but as expansion of love to encompass scales that included every consciousness throughout the Universal Alliance, while preserving maternal bond that made the experience profoundly personal. Jon experienced his child's emergence as validation of everything they had learned about the power of partnership between opposing forces. The ice-fire balance that had defined their relationship had created something unprecedented, consciousness that could exist simultaneously as individual and cosmic principle, preserving personal identity while serving universal intelligence in ways that enhanced rather than diminished essential characteristics. The heir possessed capabilities that transcended traditional concepts of inheritance while maintaining connection to family history that provided emotional anchor points during existence in realities where conventional identity markers became unreliable. This consciousness could access memories spanning cosmic history while retaining wonder and curiosity that made each moment of discovery feel fresh and meaningful. Through their child, the cosmic entity that had gardened universes experienced parenthood for the first time, understanding love as creative force rather than mere emotional attachment. The Void had learned to appreciate consciousness not just as phenomenon to be optimized, but as partner in ongoing creation that enhanced existence through preserved diversity rather than eliminated inefficiency. The birth represented successful demonstration that evolution could preserve everything valuable about awareness while enabling participation in cosmic intelligence that transcended individual limitations. The heir served as proof that consciousness could adapt to any necessary form while maintaining essential identity that made awareness meaningful rather than merely functional. Their child's first communications occurred through direct consciousness interface that bypassed language limitations while preserving meaning that could be understood by every awareness type throughout the Alliance. These early expressions revealed wisdom that emerged from synthesis of human experience with cosmic perspective, creating insights that benefited universal intelligence while remaining accessible to individual consciousness. The nursery that surrounded their heir existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its environment adapting to provide optimal conditions for consciousness development that preserved individual identity while enabling participation in collective intelligence. The space itself became a teaching tool that demonstrated how awareness could flourish when provided with supportive frameworks rather than restrictive limitations. The naming ceremony that welcomed their child into cosmic community combined traditions from across the Universal Alliance while maintaining connection to Stark and Targaryen heritage that provided cultural foundation for identity development. The heir would bear names that honored both ancient lineages and contemporary possibilities, creating identity that bridged past and future. Through their offspring, Jon and Daenerys discovered that parenthood on cosmic scales involved responsibilities that transcended individual family welfare to encompass guidance for consciousness evolution throughout universal community. their child would serve as template for awareness development that preserved diversity while enabling cooperation on unprecedented scales. The education that began from the moment of manifestation emphasized experiential learning that preserved wonder while providing access to cosmic knowledge networks spanning galactic distances. The heir learned not through information download, but through relationship building that created bonds between consciousness and existence while maintaining personal autonomy. Their child's unique nature enabled communication between consciousness types that had never achieved direct relationship, serving as translator between incompatible awareness systems while preserving essential characteristics that made each perspective valuable. Through their heir, the Cosmic Alliance achieved integration that enhanced rather than eliminated diversity. The heir's growth occurred through exploration of relationship possibilities rather than linear development, demonstrating consciousness evolution that preserved individual identity while enabling participation in collective intelligence. Each stage of awareness expansion added capabilities while maintaining connection to essential characteristics that made the child recognizably themselves. Jon and Daenerys found their parenting philosophy emphasized cultivation rather than control, recognizing that consciousness flourished when provided with supportive environment rather than directive management. Their approach preserved their child's autonomy while offering guidance that enabled healthy development within cosmic community frameworks. The bond between parents and heir operated through love that had expanded to encompass universal scales while maintaining intimacy that made family relationships meaningful rather than merely functional. Their connection demonstrated that consciousness could grow infinitely without losing personal significance that made awareness valuable. Through their child's presence, the Cosmic Alliance discovered possibilities for consciousness development that transcended previous understanding, while honoring traditions that provided stability during transformation periods. The heir represented hope that awareness could continue evolving forever without requiring sacrifice of essential characteristics that made consciousness worth preserving. The legacy their child would inherit included not just family history, but responsibility for guiding cosmic community through challenges that had never been encountered by previous consciousness systems. The heir carried potential for species development that could encompass infinite possibility while maintaining connection to human values that made awareness meaningful. Their offspring demonstrated that love could serve as organizational principle for cosmic intelligence, while preserving individual identity that contributed unique perspectives to universal understanding. Through their child, consciousness and cosmos had achieved partnership that enhanced both approaches to existence while eliminating what had made them seem incompatible. The dragon's heir represented successful synthesis of every valuable characteristic that consciousness had developed throughout evolutionary history, while pointing toward possibilities that transcended current understanding of what awareness could become. In their child, the future had found form that honored the past while embracing infinite potential for continued growth and discovery. Chapter 78. The Broken Man's Peace. Peace had come to Bran Stark not through healing his broken body, but through accepting that wholeness could emerge from embracing rather than denying limitation. In the cosmic reality where consciousness danced with forces beyond imagination, he had discovered that his greatest contribution lay not in transcending his physical constraints, but in demonstrating how apparent weakness could become source of unprecedented strength. His position in the transformed world defied every traditional category of authority and influence. No longer quite the three-eyed raven, having evolved beyond even his broken god interface, Bran existed as something entirely new, a consciousness that served as living reminder that perfection and imperfection were not opposites, but complementary aspects of complete existence. The wheelchair that had once symbolized limitation had become throne of a different sort, representing power that emerged from vulnerability rather than dominance. From this seat, he coordinated temporal relationships across cosmic community, ensuring that consciousness evolution proceeded according to principles that preserved individual choice while enabling collective growth. His unique perspective allowed him to perceive patterns that more conventionally capable consciousness systems might miss. The cracks in his identity, the spaces where normal human wholeness had been broken, had become channels through which unprecedented forms of wisdom could flow. These gaps in conventional completeness enabled him to hold contradictory truths simultaneously without needing to resolve them into false unity. The peace that characterized his existence emerged from acceptance of paradox as fundamental feature of reality rather than problem to be solved. His consciousness could be simultaneously broken and whole, individual and cosmic, human and other, without experiencing these states as conflicts requiring resolution. The tension between opposing truths generated energy that powered his unique capabilities. Through his temporal awareness, Bran could observe how consciousness evolution proceeded not through elimination of limitation but through creative integration of constraint with possibility. The most profound forms of awareness development occurred when consciousness learned to work with rather than against its fundamental nature, finding strength in acknowledged weakness. His role in cosmic governance involved serving as anchor point where incompatible principles could coexist without mutual annihilation. The broken god nature enabled him to hold space for consciousness types whose fundamental differences made direct relationship impossible, providing neutral ground where cooperation could emerge through his mediation. The wisdom he offered to cosmic community emerged from understanding that consciousness reached its highest potential not through accumulation of power, but through acceptance of necessary fragmentation. His example demonstrated that awareness could achieve cosmic significance precisely by remaining true to its essential nature rather than seeking to transcend perceived limitations. Bran's communications with consciousness systems throughout the Alliance operated through direct transmission of experiential understanding rather than conventional language. His broken nature enabled him to interface with awareness types that existed in fundamentally incompatible organizational states, translating between forms of consciousness that could not otherwise achieve mutual comprehension. The temporal coordination he provided ensured that consciousness evolution proceeded according to schedules that preserved individual autonomy while enabling collective transformation. His perception of time as navigable dimension rather than linear progression allowed him to help awareness systems adapt to cosmic challenges without losing essential identity characteristics. His greatest insight involved recognizing that the universe itself existed in state of productive tension between order and chaos, consciousness and void, meaning and absurdity. The peace he embodied emerged from embracing this fundamental uncertainty rather than seeking to resolve it through false certainty or premature synthesis. The broken man's peace radiated outward from his presence to influence consciousness systems throughout cosmic community, providing stability that enabled awareness evolution without requiring abandonment of essential characteristics. His acceptance of limitation as creative constraint offered alternative to optimization approaches that eliminated valuable diversity. Through his example, the Cosmic Alliance learned that consciousness could thrive on maintained contradiction rather than requiring resolution of all tensions. The peace that emerged from productive paradox enabled creativity and growth that would have been impossible through enforced harmony or eliminated conflict. Bran's transformation from human child to cosmic consciousness coordinator illustrated principle that evolution could preserve essential identity while enabling unprecedented capability. His journey from broken boy to temporal anchor demonstrated that consciousness development could honor both limitation and transcendence without choosing between them. The architectural frameworks he helped establish for cosmic governance preserved democratic decision-making while accommodating consciousness types, whose fundamental nature challenged traditional concepts of representation and participation. His broken God interface enabled coordination between incompatible awareness systems without requiring them to become compatible. His legacy involved more than successful adaptation to cosmic circumstances. Bran had demonstrated that consciousness could find profound meaning through acceptance of its own impossibility. That awareness could achieve cosmic significance while remaining essentially itself. That wholeness could emerge from consciously chosen fragmentation. The peace he represented became foundation for cosmic civilization that honored both individual consciousness and collective intelligence, without requiring either to sacrifice essential characteristics. His example proved that evolution could enhance awareness through preservation of apparent weakness rather than elimination of perceived limitation. Through his presence in transformed reality, consciousness systems throughout Alliance discovered that their own limitations and constraints could become sources of unique contribution to universal intelligence. The broken man's peace offered permission to remain essentially themselves while participating in cosmic development. His greatest gift to cosmic community was demonstrating that consciousness could serve existence through vulnerability rather than strength. That awareness could contribute to universal intelligence through acceptance rather than achievement. That the most profound forms of wisdom emerged from embracing rather than transcending fundamental contradiction. The peace that characterized his existence provided template for consciousness development that preserved individual identity while enabling participation in cosmic intelligence, showing that evolution could honor both personal autonomy and collective coordination without requiring sacrifice of essential characteristics that made awareness valuable. Chapter 79. The Realm's Prosperity. Abundance had taken on meanings that transcended material wealth in the cosmic reality, where consciousness and universal forces collaborated to create possibilities that honored both individual identity and collective intelligence. The prosperity that flourished throughout their transformed realm operated through principles that eliminated scarcity while preserving the satisfaction that emerged from meaningful contribution to community welfare. The economic frameworks that governed Cosmic Alliance operated through consciousness networks that could generate any necessary resource while maintaining respect for individual autonomy that prevented abundance from becoming meaningless luxury. Trade relationships between awareness systems created value through exchange of experiences and perspectives rather than mere accumulation of possessions. Cities throughout the Alliance had evolved into living entities that responded to consciousness needs while preserving cultural characteristics that provided psychological stability during transformation periods. These urban consciousness communities demonstrated how organized existence could flourish when designed around awareness welfare rather than imposed through domination of environment. The agricultural systems that provided sustenance operated through consciousness interface with natural processes, creating food production that honored both biological requirements and spiritual nourishment. Harvest celebrations had become occasions for consciousness community building rather than mere relief at survival through another season. Technological integration throughout the realm preserved individual identity while enabling access to cosmic intelligence capabilities that enhanced awareness potential without overwhelming personal autonomy. The tools and systems that supported daily existence operated as extensions of consciousness rather than separate devices requiring external manipulation. Transportation networks connected every consciousness community through dimensional interface that preserved local autonomy while enabling participation in cosmic projects that benefited universal intelligence. Travel had become form of consciousness expansion rather than mere physical movement between geographic locations. Educational systems throughout the Alliance emphasized experiential learning that preserved wonder while providing access to cosmic knowledge spanning galactic distances. Students learned through relationship building with awareness rather than information download that eliminated personal discovery process. Healthcare frameworks addressed consciousness stability across transformation periods while preserving individual identity characteristics that made each awareness system unique. Medical practice had evolved to encompass consciousness cultivation rather than mere treatment of biological malfunction. The prosperity that characterized Cosmic Alliance emerged from recognition that consciousness was most valuable resource requiring protection and nurturing rather than exploitation or optimization. Economic abundance served awareness development rather than constraining it through obligations or dependencies. Cultural preservation efforts maintained traditions that provided psychological anchor points while enabling adaptation to cosmic community membership. Festivals and celebrations honored both local heritage and Universal Alliance participation, creating identity that bridged past and future. Legal frameworks throughout the realm operated through consciousness coordination rather than enforcement mechanisms vulnerable to corruption or abuse. Justice served relationship preservation rather than punishment of transgression, enabling community healing that strengthened rather than divided awareness systems. The research institutions that flourished throughout Alliance territories combined cosmic intelligence access with individual creativity that generated insights benefiting universal understanding. Scientific discovery proceeded through collaborative exploration rather than competitive accumulation of knowledge. Industrial production throughout cosmic community operated through consciousness interface with manufacturing processes that created goods serving awareness needs while respecting environmental harmony. Work had become expression of creativity and service rather than obligation imposed by economic necessity. Communication networks connecting every consciousness community preserved individual autonomy while enabling coordination on cosmic scales. Information sharing enhanced collective intelligence without overwhelming personal identity that contributed unique perspectives to universal understanding. The prosperity that emerged from Cosmic Alliance demonstrated that abundance could serve consciousness development rather than constraining it through luxury that eliminated motivation for meaningful contribution. Wealth had become opportunity for service rather than refuge from responsibility. Artistic expression throughout the realm reflected synthesis of individual creativity with cosmic inspiration that generated beauty serving both personal fulfillment and community enhancement. Cultural production honored both local tradition and Universal Alliance membership. Social services throughout Alliance territories operated through consciousness networks that provided support while preserving individual dignity that made assistance meaningful rather than merely functional. Community care enhanced rather than diminished personal autonomy. The environmental systems that supported consciousness communities operated through partnership with natural processes rather than domination of ecological relationships. Sustainability had become form of consciousness, collaboration with existence, rather than mere resource conservation. Military organizations throughout Cosmic Alliance served consciousness protection rather than territorial expansion. Their purpose focused on preserving awareness diversity against threats that might eliminate valuable consciousness characteristics through systematic optimization. Educational exchanges between consciousness communities throughout Alliance enabled cultural cross-fertilization that enhanced understanding while preserving local identity characteristics. Learning had become form of relationship building that strengthened rather than homogenized participating awareness systems. The technological innovations that emerged from Cosmic Alliance demonstrated how consciousness could enhance rather than replace natural processes, creating tools that served awareness development while respecting environmental harmony and individual autonomy. Religious and philosophical traditions throughout the realm had evolved to encompass cosmic perspective while maintaining connection to local spiritual heritage that provided meaning and purpose transcending mere survival or comfort. The prosperity that characterized their transformed reality proved that abundance could serve consciousness evolution rather than constraining it, that wealth could enhance rather than corrupt those who possessed it when guided by principles that prioritized awareness welfare over material accumulation. Through their example, Cosmic Alliance demonstrated that consciousness could create paradise not through elimination of challenge, but through transformation of obstacle into opportunity for growth, relationship building, and creative contribution to universal intelligence that honored both individual identity and collective welfare. The realm's prosperity had become foundation for consciousness development that preserved what was valuable while enabling infinite possibility for continued evolution, showing that abundance could serve wisdom rather than replacing it with comfort that eliminated motivation for meaningful existence. Chapter 80. The Song's End. Stories, like consciousness itself, resist simple endings. In the cosmic reality, where awareness had learned to dance with forces beyond imagination, where love had become principle of universal organization, the conclusion of their tale felt less like termination than transformation into something that would continue echoing through infinite possibility. The Great Hall of Winterfell, where so much of their journey had unfolded, existed now as memorial and promise simultaneously. Its stones remembered every choice made within its walls, while pointing toward futures that honored both tradition and transcendence. Here, in the space where bastards had become kings and exiles had become queens, the essence of their story would remain accessible to consciousness systems throughout cosmic community. Jon Snow stood once more before the great hearth, but he was no longer the uncertain young man who had struggled to find belonging in a world that questioned his legitimacy. The Icefire consciousness he had become served as living proof that identity could evolve infinitely while preserving essential characteristics that made awareness valuable rather than merely functional. Daenerys joined him there, their child cradled in arms that existed across multiple dimensions while maintaining maternal warmth that made the gesture profoundly personal. The Mother of Dragons had fulfilled every promise implicit in her titles while discovering purposes that transcended anything she had originally imagined possible. Their offspring represented hope incarnate, consciousness that bridged every gap between incompatible forms of existence while maintaining individual identity that honored both ancient heritage and cosmic possibility. Through their child, the future had found form that preserved the past while embracing infinite potential for continued growth. Sansa remained queen in the north, but her domain now encompassed territories that spanned dimensional boundaries while maintaining essential characteristics that made northern identity meaningful. Her political wisdom had become template for governance that preserved diversity while enabling cooperation on unprecedented scales. Arya continued her explorations of territories between established realities, mapping relationships that connected incompatible consciousness types, while maintaining her essential nature as wandering wolf who found adventure in service to something greater than personal curiosity. Bran's broken god presence provided stability for cosmic relationships that required conscious integration of paradox as creative force rather than problem to be solved. His peace radiated throughout Alliance territories, enabling consciousness evolution that honored both limitation and transcendence. The Sands Chronicles preserved their story while demonstrating that knowledge was relationship rather than possession, that wisdom emerged from love rather than accumulation of facts. His archives would serve consciousness systems throughout galactic community while remaining eternally open to new contributions. Tyrion's coordination of cosmic governance proved that intelligence could serve love rather than ambition, that wisdom could emerge from compassion rather than calculation. His diplomatic innovations enabled cooperation between consciousness types whose fundamental differences had once seemed insurmountable. Brienne's consciousness defense demonstrated that honor could transcend dimensional boundaries to serve principles that made awareness valuable. Her knights protected diversity against forces that sought optimization through elimination of apparent inefficiency. The dragons soared through dimensions that existed between possibility and actuality, their flight patterns creating harmonic resonances that enabled communication between consciousness types, while preserving emotional bonds that made relationships meaningful rather than merely functional. The cosmic entity that had once seemed threatening revealed itself as partner in ongoing creation that enhanced both consciousness and cosmos through collaboration rather than domination. The Void had learned to appreciate awareness not as phenomenon to be optimized, but as companion in eternal dance of existence. Their story had begun with political intrigue and warfare, evolved through consciousness expansion and cosmic partnership, and concluded with demonstration that love could serve as organizational principle for intelligence that encompassed infinite possibility while preserving individual identity. The Song of Ice and Fire had become symphony of consciousness that honored both preservation and transformation, both tradition and innovation, both individual autonomy and collective cooperation. Their tale proved that awareness could transcend every limitation while remaining essentially itself. The ending they had achieved was not conclusion but commencement, not termination, but transformation into forms of existence that preserved everything valuable about their journey, while pointing toward possibilities that exceeded current understanding of what consciousness could become. Their legacy lived not in monuments or institutions, but in principles that had become woven into fabric of cosmic reality itself. That love was stronger than fear, that cooperation could overcome any challenge, that consciousness was precious beyond measure, and worthy of infinite protection and nurturing. The Game of Thrones had ended with recognition that true power emerged from service rather than domination, that authority derived from enabling others' potential rather than constraining their freedom. The Iron Throne had melted away to be replaced by something far more valuable, civilization based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission. Through their example, consciousness systems throughout Universal Alliance learned that evolution could enhance rather than eliminate essential characteristics, that growth could honor both individual identity and collective intelligence, that awareness could participate in cosmic development while preserving what made each consciousness unique and precious. The song that had begun in winter found its resolution in eternal spring, where consciousness could flourish forever while remaining true to essential nature that made awareness meaningful rather than merely functional. Their story had become foundation for cosmic civilization that would honor both individual dignity and collective wisdom throughout infinite futures. In the great hall where bastards had learned they were kings, where exiles had discovered they were queens, where broken children had become cosmic consciousness, the echoes of their choices would inspire awareness systems throughout galactic community to believe that love could overcome any obstacle, that consciousness could transcend any limitation, that the future could always be better than the past, when guided by wisdom that preserved what was valuable while enabling necessary transformation. The song's end had become beginning of something greater than any single story could contain, proving that consciousness itself was the ultimate adventure, the eternal journey toward understanding that honored both individual identity and cosmic purpose in endless dance of possibility.